Spiteful Gesture. Only a few weeks had passed since Edward had taken his passenger train. It had been Edward's first day out in a long time. And almost all the engines had given Edward their full support. However, two did not. Gordon and 98462 were quite displeased with Edward. 98462 was one of three engines brought by the Fat Director to the railway on trial. He didn't have a name, just a number. He and Gordon had a great deal in common. They were both rude and cocky. However, unlike Gordon, he never seemed to know when enough was enough.
You finally managed to make it out of the station,
cackled 98462 as Edward backed down into the sheds one night. Edward had just returned from his passenger run and was feeling quite proud.
What a useless engine you are, Edward. I'm sure we'll be hearing plenty of complaints from the passengers tomorrow. You must have been running late all day.
The others gave 98462 a foul look, but Edward just smiled.
Actually, we were right on time. I'm very happy to be useful again, he chuckled.
Edward knew that as long as he did not let 98462's words bother him, the engine wouldn't berate him for long. And soon enough, not getting any sort of reaction out of Edward, the big blue bully drifted off to sleep. As Edward was now working regularly on passenger trains, the Fat Director extended the timetable to run later into the evenings. This now meant Edward, Gordon, and 98462 would be running the passenger service all across the island. Edward had his doubts, but was determined to work his hardest. Fortunately for him, he ran the loop line, so only saw Gordon and 98462 at the big station. The weeks passed. Edward thought his trains were getting heavier and heavier, or he was getting older and older. The other engines had noticed this, and offered to help.
Whew. No thank you, panted Edward. You have your own trains to manage. You can't upset the Fat Director's timetable.
Little did Edward know, 98462 heard everything, and he made a plan. Edward arrived at the big station to collect his first passenger train. When he arrived, he saw that there were no coaches.
Thomas must have woken up late again, he thought.
He was just about to go collect some more, when 98462 came hooting and wheeshing into the platform, with Edward's coaches.
No need to fret, he said snootily. I'll be taking your train today. We mustn't upset the Fat Director's timetable.
He laughed loudly as the guard blew his whistle and set off. Edward was upset, but he thought it was best to get on with his work. That evening, Edward was backing into his berth, as 98462 was boasting loudly.
We don't need Edwin anymore. I've proven I can manage two trains at once. Why keep him around when all he does is get in the way?
Edward helped build these rails that you run on, fumed Thomas. Without him, none of us could have a railway to work on. 98462 interjected.
He's a thing of the past. Us bigger tender engines are faster, stronger, and more up-to-date than old iron.
Edward finally gave up. He decided to take a stand against 98462. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual to collect his coaches and make it to the platform before 98462. The yard was silent, and Edward felt sure he had beaten him.
And what do you think you're doing?
Fussed 98462. Edward tried to sound brave.
Collecting my coaches from my passenger train. I don't think so,
98462 growled.
You're nothing but slow and old. You are going to sit in the shed and wait to be sent away. Or even better, scrapped.
Before Edward could say another word, 98462 backed down onto his line and coupled up to his coaches. Edward's heart sank, but not for long.
And just what do you think you're doing?
Bellowed a familiar voice. It was the fat director.
Collecting my train, sir,
98462 replied, trying to look innocent as he could.
From what I've just seen, that is not the case at all. I've had passenger complaints saying they were taken to the wrong stations, and fellow workers complaining about your treatment of others.
98462's face turned white as a ghost.
My engines,
the fat director went on,
work hard and help fellow engines. You have done neither of those. Let me remind you, I had brought you here to work here on trial, and I can see you are not fit for my railway. You shall go back home to the other railway tonight. For now, I want you to go back to the sheds immediately.
98462 couldn't muster up a response, so he sulked back to the sheds. The fat director turned to Edward.
You must understand, Edward. You are one of my engines. You might not think so, but you are not alone on this railway. If you have any troubles, you must come and see me right away. Understand?
Edward could see from his warm smile that the fat director was told everything. He looked across the yard and saw Henry and Thomas smiling back.
Now, you have a train to pull. Then after that, I want you to have a nice long rest.
As he set off, he felt his position on the fat director's railway was secure, and had no more troubles from that day on. That was, until Gordon... I mustn't say any more, or I shall spoil the next story.